At 9 hours on the 14th of July 1944, in a muddy field near Saint-Lô, France, Sergeant Curtis Cullen was staring at a pile of garbage. It wasn't a secret weapon sent from Washington. It was rusted scrap metal, jagged, ugly steel beams scavenged from the enemy's own beach defenses. To the elite engineers back home, this idea was stupid. To the commanding officers on the ground, it was useless. In fact, unauthorized modification of a 30-ton Sherman tank was a crime. It was effectively banned. They said it was impossible. They mocked the very idea. But this piece of trash didn't just break the regulations. It saved thousands of American lives. It smashed through the impenetrable German defense line in less than 48 hours. How did a redneck's ignored joke and a pile of rusted scrap metal defeat the most disciplined million-dollar war machine in history? Normandy wasn't supposed to be a graveyard for tanks. It was supposed to be a race to Berlin. But in July 1944, the mightiest army in the world was stopped cold by the bocage. Centuries-old earthen walls, thick with roots and stone, turning every field into a fortress. Here is why we were losing. The standard army tactic was simple. Climb over obstacles. But physics is cruel. When a 30-ton Sherman tank tries to climb a 6-foot hedge, its nose points to the sky. For 5 agonizing seconds, its unarmored underbelly is exposed. The Germans just waited. One shot from a hidden Panzerfaust into that soft belly, and the tank becomes a burning steel coffin. The smell of diesel and seared flesh filled the air. Yet the orders from the top remained the same. Follow the manual. The real villain here wasn't the Nazis. It was dogma. The generals wanted a standardized war. The Department of Ordnance banned unauthorized modifications. They wanted neat, uniform rows of equipment. They valued procedure over survival. Every time a tank commander followed the rules, his crew died. Enter the anomaly. Sergeant Curtis Cullen. He wasn't a general looking at a map in a safe tent. He was in the mud, and he was listening to a man everyone else ignored. A Tennessee hillbilly named Roberts, a man with 0 engineering degrees, but a lifetime of street smarts. While the experts were writing condolence letters, Roberts was looking at the problem with the eyes of a farmer, not a soldier. And he was about to suggest something completely insane. The hedgerows of Saint-Lô were not just walls of dirt. They were coffins. Picture this. You are inside a Sherman tank. It is 100 degrees Fahrenheit inside. The air smells of sweat, diesel, and the lingering metallic taste of fear. The order comes down. Advance. The driver shifts gears. The tracks scream against the dry earth. To get over the hedge, the tank has to climb. It tilts upward. 30 tons of steel point at the sky. Inside, for the crew, the world tilts. They are blind. Their guns are pointing at the clouds. And for 5 terrifying seconds, the thin, unarmored belly of the tank is exposed to the enemy. Across the field, a German gunner holding a Panzerfaust doesn't even have to aim. He just waits. Whoosh! A line of smoke. Then, the sound of a sledgehammer hitting a tin can. The shell penetrates the floor. The ammunition rack ignites. It's not a battle anymore. It's an execution. You can hear the screams over the radio. Then, static. This was the standard procedure. This was the right way. And it was killing them, one crew at a time. The morale of the 2nd Armoured Division wasn't just low, it was buried in the mud. During a lull in the slaughter, the men gathered in a trench. They were exhausted, filthy, waiting for their turn to die. They were brainstorming, trying to solve the puzzle that the generals couldn't. Some suggested dynamite. Too slow. Some suggested bulldozers. Too few. Then, a voice spoke up from the back. It wasn't an officer. It was Roberts, a man his unit called a Tennessee hillbilly. He didn't know thermodynamics. He didn't know military doctrine, but he knew farming. He looked at the hedgerows, not as a military fortification, but as a stubborn root system. He said, simply, "Why don't we get some saw teeth and put them on the front of the tank? Take a bite out of these hedges." Silence. Then, Laughter. It started as a chuckle and turned into ridicule. Saw teeth? On a tank? Go back to sleep, Roberts. They mocked him. They treated his idea like a child's drawing. It sounded absurd. A 30-ton war machine doesn't need teeth. It needs firepower. But Sergeant Curtis Coulin didn't laugh. He was staring at Roberts. He wasn't hearing a joke. He was hearing a solution. He took the idea to the engineering officers. He expected support. Instead, he got a wall of bureaucracy. Denied. The logic of the command was cold. You cannot weld scrap metal to the hull of a Sherman. It violates Army Regulation 750-10. It compromises the structural integrity of the armor. It voids the warranty of the war machine. If you alter the tank and the tank breaks, that is on your head. They were worried about paperwork. Coulin was worried about survival. He walked out of that command tent with a choice. He could follow orders, wait for the next attack, and watch his friends burn in their tanks. Or he could commit a crime. He could steal the steel. He could build the device in secret. Coulin looked at his welding torch. He looked at the German beach obstacles, the Czech hedgehogs piled up nearby as scrap. He realized the irony. The only way to defeat the Germans was to use their own steel against them. He turned to his crew. Tonight, we work. Night falls over the motor pool. While the rest of the First Army tries to sleep through the distant thud of artillery, Coulin and his team become scavengers. They creep out into the darkness, moving toward the beaches they had stormed just weeks ago. They aren't looking for souvenirs. They are looking for the enemy's trash, the Czech hedgehogs. Massive, cross-shaped steel beams the Germans had planted in the sand to rip the bottoms out of landing craft. Now, they are twisted wreckage. Back at the maintenance tent, the real work begins. It is illegal work. Hiss. The acetylene torch cuts into the German steel. The blue arc light flickers against the canvas walls, casting long, dancing shadows. The smell of ozone and melting metal mixes with the damp rot of the French countryside. They are not building a weapon. They are building a farm tool. Coulin isn't following a blueprint sent from the Pentagon. He is following the rough sketch of a hillbilly, drawn in the dirt with a stick. He cuts the steel into jagged, triangular tusks. They are ugly. They are heavy. They look prehistoric. Clank. A wrench drops. The men freeze. Every heart stops. Footsteps approach outside the tent. Heavy boots sucking in the mud. It's a patrol officer. If they are caught now, it's over. Modifying a tank's hull without a modification work order is a court-martial offense. Destroying government property. Insubordination. The footsteps pause. A cough. Then, they fade away. Coulin exhales. He wipes grease and sweat from his eyes. He signals to the welder. Keep going. By morning, the monstrosity is finished. They bolt the steel teeth onto the front of a light tank. It doesn't look like a military breakthrough. It looks like a backyard experiment gone wrong. A Frankenstein machine. Roberts looks at it. He kicks the steel tooth. It holds solid, but doubt is a heavy thing. What if the welds snap? What if the steel twists? What if they drive this thing into a hedgerow and it just bounces off, leaving them stranded in the kill zone? They are betting their stripes, their freedom, and their lives on a pile of scrap metal. Then, the ultimatum arrives. News comes down from the front. The attack on Saint-Lô is stalling. The casualties are unsustainable. The meat grinder is chewing up the infantry. General Omar Bradley, the commander of the First Army, is desperate. He hears a rumor about some gadget being built in the 102nd Cavalry. He doesn't send a memo. He comes himself. The 14th of July, 1944. A black staff car pulls up. General Bradley steps out. The man holding the fate of the entire American invasion is standing in the mud, looking at Coulin's ugly tank. The air is thick with tension. The officers are sweating. This is it. Bradley doesn't ask for schematics. He doesn't ask for permission slips. He points to the wildest, thickest hedgerow in the field, a wall of ancient roots and earth that had stopped every tank before it. He looks at Coulin and gives a single order. Hit it. The engine of the M4A1 Sherman screams, 400 horsepower vibrating through 30 tons of steel. Sergeant Cullen stands in the turret. His hands are gripping the hatch, knuckles white. He looks through the periscope at the target, a hedgerow, 4 feet of solid earth, reinforced by centuries of oak roots as thick as a man's leg. Normally, a tank driver approaches this wall with dread. He knows that the moment the tracks touch the dirt, the nose will skyrocket, exposing the crew to death. But today, the driver doesn't slow down. He accelerates. Inside the tank, the driver prays the welds will hold. If those scrap metal tusks snap off upon impact, the tank will just crash into the wall and stop dead. General Bradley is watching from a jeep 50 yards away. If this fails, Cullen isn't just looking at a failed experiment. He's looking at a court-martial for destroying army property. Speed, 15 miles per hour. Distance, 20 yards. The world slows down. The smell of exhaust fumes and wet grass fills the air. Impact. It doesn't sound like a collision. It sounds like the earth is being ripped apart. Crunch. The steel prongs cut from the enemy's own beach defences bite into the base of the hedgerow. They don't slide up. They dig in. For a split second, the tank shudders. The engine roars, fighting the friction of 1,000 roots. And then, the impossible happens. The nose of the tank does not rise. It stays flat. The tusks act as a plough. They tear through the root system with a violence that shakes the ground. A massive section of the hedgerow, dirt, bushes and trees, is lifted up and pushed forward. The tank bursts through the other side. It takes less than 4 seconds. The Sherman emerges into the next field, covered in dust and debris. But crucially, its 75mm cannon is level. It is stable. It is ready to fire instantly. The soft underbelly is never exposed. The turtle did not flip over. The tank spins its tracks, tearing up the grass of the new field, dominant and terrifying. On the sidelines, the silence is deafening. The mocking laughter from the other units has vanished. The infantrymen staring at the hole in the hedge are stunned. They just watched a piece of garbage turn an impenetrable fortress into an open door. The German defenders, had they been there, would have been paralyzed. They rely on the sound of a tank revving its engine to climb, giving them time to aim their rockets. But this was silent until the moment the wall exploded. General Omar Bradley lowers his binoculars. He doesn't smile. He doesn't cheer. He calculates. He turns to his ordnance officer. The skepticism is gone, replaced by urgent, cold military necessity. He points at Cullen's ugly, jagged invention. "I want that," Bradley says, "and I want 500 of them. By next week, the prototype phase is over. The hillbilly experiment has just become the most important secret weapon of the European theatre. Now, the race begins. Not against the Germans, but against time. They have 7 days to equip an entire army with scrap metal. The order from General Bradley didn't just change the strategy, it changed the very nature of the army. Overnight, the most valuable men in Normandy were not the sharpshooters or the pilots. They were the welders. The command went out, "Get the steel, any way you can," and this is the turning point. The American supply lines were stretched thin. There was no fresh steel arriving from the factories in Detroit. To save the tanks, they had to cannibalize the very beaches they had died to capture. Imagine the scene. It is 2 a.m. The beaches of Omaha and Utah are quiet, save for the rhythmic crashing of the waves. But then, you hear it. Hiss, pop, hiss. Teams of mechanics descend on the Czech hedgehogs, those massive, cross-shaped iron beams the Germans planted to rip the bottoms off Allied ships. Sparks fly into the night sky like reverse rain. The smell of ozone and acetylene is overpowering. The metal screams as the torches cut through it. They are harvesting the enemy's defense to build the enemy's doom. Back at the assembly areas, it is a factory of madness. There are no blueprints, no safety inspections. Just tired men with grimy faces, working in shifts, fusing jagged steel onto the pristine noses of 500 Sherman tanks. The Rhino wasn't just a modification anymore. It was a virus, a good virus. The rumor spread from the 2nd Armored to the 3rd, then to the infantry divisions. Every tank crew wanted one. They begged for them. They bartered cigarettes and whiskey with the maintenance crews just to get bumped up the line, because they knew the Rhino was the difference between a closed casket and a ticket home. But the Germans, they were not sleeping. They were listening. In the foxholes dug deep into the hedgerows, the veteran SS troops heard the change before they saw it. For weeks, the sound of a tank attack was specific. You heard the engine rev high the strain of the gears as the tank tried to climb. That high-pitched whine was the signal to ready the Panzerfaust. It meant, "The belly is coming up. Get ready to kill." But now? The sound changed. The engines didn't rev high. They stayed low, deep, a constant, guttural growl. The German commanders looked through their binoculars. They expected to see the tanks tilting up. Instead, they saw nothing. This was the evolution, the green dozer. Because the Rhino cut through the base of the hedge, it didn't just open a hole, it carried the camouflage with it. The tank pushed a massive wall of dirt and brush in front of its hull. To the German gunner, the tank didn't look like a tank anymore. It looked like the hedgerow itself had come alive and was charging at him. Feuer, Feuer, fire, fire. But where do you aim? You can't see the hull. You can't see the turret. You only see a moving forest. The panic set in. The tactical advantage didn't just shift. It flipped 180 degrees. The hunters became the hunted. In less than a week, 60% of the First Army's tanks were transformed. They were no longer sitting ducks. They were predators. And as the sun rose on July 25th, the Germans waiting in the hedgerows gripped their weapons, unaware that the rules of physics they relied on had just been rewritten by a welder's torch. Curtis Cullen and Roberts didn't conquer Normandy with a secret weapon developed in a pristine laboratory. They did it with a welding torch, a pile of enemy garbage, and a refusal to accept the impossible. Sometimes, the most brilliant solutions don't come from the experts in the high towers. They come from the mud. They come from the desperate. They come from the people who look at a broken rule and see a breakthrough. And I bet you've been there. You've faced a problem where the manual was useless, where the standard procedure was a dead end, and you had to invent your own way out. So, I want to hear from you. What is a stupid hack or a redneck repair you have used in your own life that actually worked better than the official way? Did you fix a car engine with a guitar string? Did you solve a complex coding bug by deleting everything and starting over? Pause the video right now. Scroll down. Tell me your story in the comments. Because history isn't just about generals and maps, it's about the ingenuity of the common man, just like Roberts. Now, let's go back to July 26th. The rhinos are ready, and the Germans have no idea what is about to hit them. The 25th of July 1944, Operation Cobra. The air above St. Lo vibrates. It is not the wind. It is the sound of 1,500 American bombers turning the horizon into a wall of fire. The ground beneath the tracks of the 2nd Armored Division shakes like a living thing in pain. Inside the lead Sherman tank, the heat is suffocating. The loader wipes grease from his eyes. He looks at the back of the driver's head. He knows what comes next. The bombers stop. The silence that follows is heavier than the noise. It is time to go. The signal flares pop, red against the grey smoke. 3 out of every 5 tanks in the First Army now carry the stupid invention on their nose. 600 tanks, 600 piles of scrap metal welded by exhausted men in the dark. The driver slams the gear. The engine screams. Objective. The breakout. Obstacle. The bocage. Usually, this is the moment of death. Usually, this is where you slow down to 2 miles per hour to climb the wall. But today, the speedometer reads 15 miles per hour. The tank hits the hedgerow. Crunch. It is a violent, tearing sound. The sound of ancient roots snapping like dry bones. The rhino cutter doesn't climb. It buries itself into the earth. It lifts the entire hedge, dirt, trees, rocks, and pushes it forward. A German machine gunner on the other side freezes. He has been trained to shoot the belly. He is waiting for the tank to tilt up. It never does. The Sherman bursts through the green wall, flat and level. Its 75mm cannon is already stabilized. It fires before the dust even settles. Boom. The German nest is disintegrated. The data begins to pour in from the field, faster than the radio operators can write it down. Sector 1. Breakthrough. Sector 2. Breakthrough. In previous weeks, an advance of 200 yards cost 1,000 casualties. Today, they move 1,000 yards in minutes. The green dozers, as the infantry calls them, are not just cutting holes, they are carrying the camouflage with them. The tanks look like moving bushes. The enemy is blind. The momentum is unstoppable. Target 1 neutralized. Target 5 neutralized. The speed of the advance increases by 400%. The Germans are not retreating. They are evaporating. Their Panzer Lehr division, the elite of the elite, is being overrun by farm boys using farm tactics. Inside the tank, the crew feels something they haven't felt since D-Day. Hope. They are not fighting the terrain anymore. They are surfing it. By noon, the reports reach General Bradley's tent. Casualties. Drastically low. Tanks lost to belly shots. 0. Let that number sink in. 0. The hedgerows, which had been the graveyard of the American army for 6 weeks, have been turned into a highway. The battle slows as the sun sets. The engines cut off. The metal ticks as it cools. Sergeant Kulin climbs out of his hatch. He walks to the front of his tank. The Rhino cutter is battered. It is covered in French soil and German concrete. The welds, those ugly, unauthorized welds, held fast. An officer approaches. It is one of the men who had laughed at the idea a week ago. One of the men who called Roberts a hillbilly and Kulin a tinkerer. He looks at the device. He looks at the open field ahead, cleared of enemies. He doesn't say, "Good job." He doesn't say, "I was wrong." He simply touches the jagged steel, shakes his head, and whispers, "I'll be damned." The verdict was written in the mud of St. Lo. The stupid object didn't just work. It saved the battalion. It broke the stalemate. It proved that sometimes a piece of rusted trash is worth more than $1 million tank. War has a cruel memory. It remembers the generals. It remembers the battles. But it forgets the tools. August 1944. The breakout is complete. The American army is racing across the open plains of France towards Paris. Speed is now the only thing that matters. The Rhino tanks, the heavy, jagged beasts that chewed through the hell of the hedgerows, are suddenly slow. They are heavy. They drag down the fuel efficiency. So, the order comes down again. Cut them off. Listen to the sound. It is the same acetylene hiss from 3 weeks ago, but this time there is no urgency. There is no desperate innovation. Mechanics slice through the welds. The steel prongs, the tusks that saved thousands of boys from burning to death, clatter onto the asphalt of French roads. They are kicked into ditches. They are left to rust in the summer rain. The magic weapon of Normandy becomes, once again, just a pile of garbage. And what of the men? Sergeant Curtis Kulin received the Legion of Merit. He lost a leg later in the war, fighting in the Huertgan forest. He paid his price in blood, but Roberts? The Tennessee hillbilly? The man who looked at a death trap and saw a simple farming problem? He went home. Picture him. Back in Tennessee, no ticker tape parade, no interviews with the New York Times, just a man, sitting on a porch, listening to the crickets replace the sound of artillery. He goes back to the fields. He picks up a plow. Imagine him trying to tell his story at a local bar. "I told the generals how to fix their tanks. I told them to put teeth on 'em." The locals probably laughed, just like his squad laughed in the mud. It sounds like a drunkard's tall tale. A lie. So Roberts stops telling it. He fades. The army machine moves on. The tactic of field expedient armor is written into the manuals. They draw neat, clean diagrams of the hedgerow cutters. They teach it at West Point, but they sanitize it. They scrub away the desperation. They scrub away the theft of German steel. And slowly, they scrub away the names. In the official reports, the Rhino becomes a standardized kit. The hillbilly innovation becomes military engineering. The system that initially banned the idea now claims it as its own brilliance. The hero isn't the man anymore. The hero is the protocol. Today, if you go to a military museum, you might see one. It sits in a corner, away from the shiny, restored Mustangs and the polished pattern tanks. It is a rusted, ugly triangle of iron. Tourists walk past it. They glance at it for half a second. They see a piece of scrap metal. They see trash. But stop. Look closer. Touch the rough edge of that steel. It is cold now, but once it was white hot. That piece of trash is the reason a grandfather came home to hold his grandson. It is the reason a family tree didn't end in a muddy field in France. It is the physical embodiment of a terrifying truth. The line between victory and total annihilation wasn't $1 million missile. It was a piece of junk welded by a desperate kid who refused to die. But iron rusts. And names are forgotten. The rhinos melted back into the earth. Roberts faded into the Tennessee hills. And the world moved on, forgetting that for one brief month, the most powerful weapon on earth was simply the ability to break the rules. So, what is the final lesson this piece of rusted steel is trying to scream at us from the grave? History loves to polish the medals of the generals. It loves to frame the maps of the strategists. But the Battle of the Hedgerows teaches us a different, harder truth. General Omar Bradley won the praise for Operation Cobra. The Ordnance Department took credit for the logistics. But Curtis Coolin and the ghost named Roberts, they didn't win fame. They didn't win fortune. They won something far more valuable. They won the right for their friends to grow old. This is the eternal conflict. The system versus the street. The system demands perfection. It demands authorization. It demands a manual. But the system is slow. And in the mud of Saint-Lô, slow meant dead. Roberts didn't have a manual. He had a problem. And he solved it with the only thing he had. A welder's torch and a refusal to die. Innovation is rarely clean. It is rarely authorized. True innovation often looks like disobedience. It looks like a pile of scrap metal welded to $1 million machine in the middle of the night. The Rhino tank proves that when the walls are closing in, you don't wait for permission to break them down. You don't wait for the experts to save you. You look at the garbage at your feet. You look at the impossible wall in front of you, and you build your own way through. Because sometimes, the only difference between a tragedy and a victory is the courage to do something stupid. Roberts died a ghost. Even today, historians struggle to find his full name. Curtis Coolin is just a footnote in a dusty manual. The world moves on. The algorithm favors trends, dances, and noise. It naturally wants to bury stories like this. It wants to forget the men who welded in the dark so others could see the sunrise. Don't let their names fade into the static. I am asking you to hit like and subscribe right now. Not for me, not for the views, but to force the algorithm to remember what history has forgotten. Every interaction is a signal. It tells the system that ingenuity matters, that the underdog matters, that the Rhino tank matters. Help us keep the memory alive. Today, the hedgerows of Normandy are green and quiet. Farmers plough the earth where the 2nd Armoured Division once roared. The scars of the tracks have been washed away by 80 years of rain. But if you look closely in the shadowed corner of a military museum, you might see it. A jagged, ugly triangle of rusted steel, cold to the touch, silent. It looks like garbage. It looks like something you would step over without a second glance. But stare at it long enough, and you can almost smell the ozone of the welding torch. You can hear the desperate breathing of a young tank crew praying for a miracle. It wasn't a weapon of mass destruction. It was a tool of survival. It was a wild idea, a stupid idea. But for one bloody summer in 1944,